Next.js is the best way to build React applications in my opinion. It comes with a ton of features, and the developer experience is fantastic. By watching this video, you're going to understand how to bootstrap an application with Next.js, and how to build production-grade React applications with Next.js. Next.js has a ton of features, but in this video, I'm just going to cover the ones that you need to know to get started building applications with Next. After watching this video, I encourage you to go to the Next.js documentation and check out all the awesome features that they have available. Next.js can be used to build static applications or server-rendered applications. If that doesn't make any sense to you, don't worry. In this video, I'm going to be covering both rendering strategies. So let's get started building an application with Next.js. So I'm here in VS Code and I'm going to type yarn create next app, and I'm going to call my app next guide, and I'm going to use the TypeScript flag. If you want to follow along with TypeScript, you need to use this flag as well. If you don't want to use TypeScript, that's okay. You'll still be able to follow along. After Next.js has finished bootstrapping the application and installing all the dependencies, you can cd into the application. And I'm going to use code dot to open mine in VS Code. So you'll notice we have a few folders here. We have a pages, a public, and a styles folder. So the pages folder is where all your pages will go. And I think the best feature about Next.js is that it does routing from this pages folder. So it is a file-based routing system. The public folder is where you can serve public assets from. So in here we have a favicon and the Vercel logo. And then in the styles folder, you can create your styles module. So you see here there's a global CSS, and then there's a home.module.css. And this is just going to be imported into the index page. In the pages folder, you'll notice this API folder. And in here you can make API handlers. So you can see here if you go to /API/hello, you can send back a 200. But we're not going to be talking about Next.js APIs, so I'm just going to delete this folder. So open up the package.json and you can see we have a dev script and we have a build script and we have a start and a lint. So to run Next.js in dev, you can type yarn dev, and you can see here that the server started on port 3000. So we can go have a look at that in our browser. So you can see here we get all the contents from the index page, and it says to get started, edit pages, index.js. This is obviously wrong, but that's okay. So we can come back to the index.tsx file, and we can remove all the contents except for the header. And this header component is really useful. You can use this on any page, and it's going to modify the header contents of the page. So you can see here we have a title and we have a meta description. So if you view the page source, you can see we should have a title and a meta description. So you can see here our title, and we also have our meta description here as well. The underscore app is going to wrap every single page. So if we put something into here, we can add a fragment, and we can just say this is underscore app. And we come back to our page. You can see it says up here, this is underscore app. So I think the best feature of Next.js is this pages system. So we can create a new file in here and we can just call this hello.tsx. And we can say function hello page. And we can export the hello page as default. And from the hello page, we can just return a h1 that says hello page. And then if we come over to localhost 3000 and go /hello, you can see we get our h1 and we get our underscore app, and you don't need to set up any routing for this to work. So for this tutorial, I'm going to use the Rick and Morty REST API to fetch some data and display it on the page. So the first method that I'm going to use is called getStaticProps. So I'm going to say export const getStaticProps equals an async function. So the alternative to getStaticProps is going to be getServerSideProps. But getStaticProps is going to run when you build your application, and getServerSideProps means you have to run your application in Lambda functions. So you can use this to build a static website, and you can build getServerSideProps to build a dynamic server rendering website. And in this tutorial, I'm going to show you both methods. So inside our async function, we're going to pass in some context. And I say const res equals await and I'm going to use fetch, and I'm going to make a GET request to this Rick and Morty API / character, and this is just going to return an array of characters. So I'm going to say const, and I'm going to destructure result equals await res.json. And I'm just going to return from here. I'm going to return props. And then I'm going to say my props is called characters, and it's just going to be result. So because we're using TypeScript, let's add some types to this. So my type of get static props is going to be get static props. And you can see that this comes from Next itself. And let's type this result here. So to get types for result, I'm going to go up to our home page, and I'm going to get the props here. So I'm going to say I expect characters. And for now, I'm just going to type this as any. Let's come down to the body of our page, and I'm just going to say json.stringify, and I'm going to stringify characters. So this is an issue here. This is actually called results, not result. So you can see here we have a lot of data, and up here we have this is app. So I'm just going to remove that. And I'm also going to remove the fragment. Back to our page, and we have all this data here. So let's copy all that. And I'm going to go to this QuickType app, and I'm going to paste in my data on the left-hand side here. And you can see we get some interfaces. Let's copy those interfaces. And I'm just going to create a new folder, and I'm just going to call this types.ts. And you can see we get our character here, and we get a bunch of other interfaces. So in our types, I'm going to create a new interface. So I'm going to say interface, export interface. And this is going to be get character results. And this is just going to be the interface for the results type. So I'm going to say info is of type info. And this is exactly what the API returns. And I'm going to create this info interface in a sec. And I'm going to say results. And this is just going to be an array of our characters. And info is going to have a count, pages, next, and previous. And this is for pagination. I'm going to come back to results, and I'm going to say get character results. Now up on our next page, if we hover over this, we can see that it's a generic. So I'm going to use that generic to type our characters. So I'm going to say characters is a type of character, and it's going to be an array of characters. Now we can remove this any, and we get all our characters here. So let's quickly map through these characters and just print out their name. So I'm going to return a list item, and this is going to be character. And you can see here we get all the props that we can see on character. So I'm going to print their name, and I'm going to add a key here. And this is going to be character.id. So you can see here that we get a list of characters, and we know those characters have an image. So let's use Next.js's image component to print out the image for those characters. So I'm just going to change this li to a div. And below the character's name, I'm going to use image. And I'm going to say the source of this image is going to be character.image. I'm going to give it an alt of character.name. I'm going to give it a width of 200 pixels and a height of 200 pixels. And you can see here we get an error. It says rickandmortyapi.com needs to be configured in under images in your Next config. So let's go do that. And this is a really good feature from Next, and it's going to stop your website from loading images from unknown sources. Let's come over to our next.config.js, and we're going to say images. And then we're going to add an array of allowed domains. So I'm going to say domains, and then I'm going to paste in our Rick and Morty API. So let's stop our server now and restart it. And come back over to our localhost port 3000. So this is good. You can see that we get our images loading and we get a name. So in theory, we should be able to build this website and create a static website. So let's try to do that. Let's come into package.json, and next to build, we're going to say and next export. Let's stop our server, and I'm going to say yarn build. So it's telling us here that we can't export because we're using the image component. So to be able to use images and export a static website, you need to use a loader. So there's different loaders you can use, and there's some that will upload your images to service providers like Cloudinary, but we're just going to create our own loader because these images are already hosted by the Rick and Morty API. So let's make a new file, and I'm going to call this image loader.ts. I'm going to say const image loader equals, and this is just going to be a function, so it needs a lowercase I. And this is going to take a few properties, but the one property we need is source. The next one is going to be width and height, but we don't need those. And we're just going to return the source. Let's export default image loader. And we can say that source is going to be a string. So on our images, let's say loader equals image loader. So VS Code should import your image loader for you. And the other option that we need is going to be unoptimized. So we don't want Next.js to optimize these images for us because they're already hosted. So let's try yarn build again. So this is really confusing because it's telling us that we need to use an image loader, but we're already using one here. But what it's actually telling us is we need to have an image loader set in our Next config. So let's say loader is equal to a custom loader. And then the path is just going to be /, which means it's going to be served at the root. Let's try build again. And you can see here that Next.js has built our application. So you'll have a few icons here. This server is a Lambda function. The static is just this hollow circle, and then the SSG is going to be the filled in circle. So you can see here, it's created a few files, and it's going to tell you the 404 file is going to be a static /hello, because we left that in here, is going to be static. So you'll notice this out directory here, and this out directory has a bunch of files in it now. We have an index.html, hello.html, a 404, and we get some other assets as well. So let's try run our static website. So you can do that with npx serve, and we're going to pass in out because this is going to be our out directory. If yours was in build, you would say npx serve build, for example. So this is going to create a server, and then it's going to serve all the files in this folder here. You could just drag and drop this into a web browser and that would work. Let's go to localhost port 5000 and have a look at this. And you can see here we have a static website. So we can view page source on this page, and it looks pretty much exactly the same, except this is a production build. So let's create a page for each individual character. So I'm going to start my dev server again. I'm going to delete hello.tsx because we're not going to use that. Then inside pages, I'm going to create a new folder. And I'm going to create this, and I'm going to call this folder characters. And then inside characters, I'm going to create one new file. and this is going to be some square brackets, and I'm going to call this id.tsx. And the square brackets mean that this is going to be a dynamic route. So we can say function character page. I'm going to export default character page. And I'm just going to return a div that says character page. So let's go to our website on /characters. And I'm just going to say /11. And you can see here that it's going to return characters page for every single one of these routes. So I'm going to build this characters page with both methods. And so you'll be able to see which one is going to work best for you. So the first method I'm going to use is creating a static website, and then I'm going to server render these pages. So the first thing we need to do is create a function called getStaticPaths. So I'm going to say export async function, and I'm going to call this function getStaticPaths. And just like before, I'm going to say const response is equal to fetch all the characters. Then I'm going to say results is equal to get characters results. And then we're just going to turn the response into res.json. Now this is where it gets interesting. We're going to return a new object, and I'm going to say paths, and this needs to be an array. So we're going to say results.map, and I'm going to pass in character. Next, I'm going to return a new object. This object is going to have one property, and it's going to be called params. I'm going to say ID, and then I'm going to say character.id. And I'm just going to cast this ID to a string as well. So when we build our page, this function is going to run, and then it's going to run through all the characters, and it's going to create some params with our ID. And then we're going to use the output of this function to render a static page for every single item that's in this array. So I'm going to create a new function. I'm going to say export async function get static props. We're going to have one argument here, and this is going to be called params. And params is going to be this object up here. So we're just going to say it's going to have an ID of string. So I'm going to make one network request, and this network request is going to be the Rick and Morty API, and we're going to pass the params.id on the end of this API, and this is going to return the result for one character. Then I'm going to say const character equals res.json, turn that into JSON. Then I'm just going to return, and like we did on the index page, I'm going to say props. Then I'm going to pass in the character. So let's go up to the actual function. And in here, we're going to get our character, and we can type this out. Is of type character. And let's return a h1. And this is going to be our character.name. And let's also return an image. So I'm going to import image from next/image. So let's do a source of character.image, an alt of character.name. And for anyone that's new to web development and doesn't know what alt is, it's alternative text. In case the image can't load, it will show this text instead. And I think screen readers use it as well. So let's give it a width of 200 pixels again, and a height of 200 pixels. And we also need a loader here. So I'm going to say loader equals image loader. And I'm going to say unoptimized as well. So let's come back to our index page, and I want to link the character's name to our character. So let's import next link. So import link from next slash link. Now I'm going to wrap the character's name in our link. And I'm going to give this a href of, and you need to use some templating strings. And it's going to be slash characters slash, and then we're going to use the character.id. And so link is going to pass the href on to the next element. So I'm going to pass an a tag in here. So it passes it on to an a tag instead of onto the character's name. And while we're here, let's wrap the character name in a h3. So we have an error here. The fallback key must be returned from getStaticPaths. So in getStaticPaths, let's return fallback is going to be false. So if we inspect element on this character's name, you can see that we have an a tag, and this a tag, despite us having not put an anchor on it, now has a href. And then we have the h3 in the middle. So let's click on it and see what happens. You can see here we have a little error, it says serialization error on .character, and this is because we haven't awaited res.json. And you can see that res.json returns a promise. So let's add an await here. And we can come over, and character with ID of 10 loads Alan Rails. Let's go back and we can click on Albert, and you can see that it loads the page correctly. So let's build this application now and see what happens. So I'm going to type yarn build. So if we open up our out directory and we have a look, we have a new folder here called characters, and we have a new page for every single character. And this is great. This is exactly what we expected. But the problem is that the Rick and Morty API is paginated. And so we only have the first 20 characters, but there's a lot more than that. So let's turn this into a server rendered application. So I'm just going to rename ID, and I'm going to change this to static. And if you're going to follow along or you're looking at the GitHub repository, you can find the static file in this folder here. So I'm going to copy the static and paste it in, and I'm going to rename this back to ID. So let's remove our getStaticPaths, and we're going to change getStaticProps to getServerSide props. And instead of params, this is going to take a context, and I'm going to change this to a anonymous function to make the typings a little bit easier. And I'm going to add a type here. It's called getServerSideProps. And you can see that that would come from next. And this obviously needs to be an async function. And this means here we get some typings on context. So our ID is now going to come from context.query.query.id. And this is all going to be the same now. So let's type yarn dev. And as the name suggests, getServerSideProps is only ever going to get run on the server. So if we console log character, you'll only see the character being logged in this terminal here, and you won't see it being logged in the terminal on the browser. Let's refresh, and we can click into a character, and our application behaves as you would expect. So if you wanted to access this ID from your component up here, the easiest way to do that is to import useRouter. So I'm going to import useRouter from next/router. And I'm going to say const router equals useRouter. And you can see here that router returns a next router. So we say console.log router dot, and you get a bunch of properties on here. So that property would be in query .id. So let's console.log this and come over to our page, inspect, and you can see here we get an ID and it's going to be 10. And you also get it on the server. So another important aspect of building an application is environment variables. So Next.js, you can create a new environment file. So I'm going to call this .n.local. And in this file, you can make public and private environment variables. By default, the environment variables are private. So I could say db connection equals and have my connection string. And if I was to go over to our index page and I wanted to print this, I would say process.n.dbconnect. And I'll just add this here and a HR tag so we can easily see what we're working with. And I'm going to restart the server and I'm just going to remove our characters because I think the styling means that they're going to be over the top of this string here. And you can see it says dbconnect and there's nothing here. So this is going to be a private environment variable. So if we want to make this public, we can add a prefix here and I'm going to say next public. And now if we restart our server, we should expect this environment variable to get printed to the screen. So we need to change this in the index to process.n.nextPublicDBConnect. And you can see here that the string appears. So Next.js makes it really easy to work with environment variables and also make your environment variables secure if you need them to be. So another really common thing in React applications is to create a layout. So I'm going to show you an easy way of doing that. So create a new folder. I'm going to call this components. And inside of components, I'm going to create a layout.tsx. You say function layout. You say export default layout. I'm going to return. And I'm just going to return a div. And the div is going to have a nav. And the nav is just going to have one line item that's home. And then we need to return children. So let's type children. Going to be react.react node. And so we want to add this layout to our pages. So one way of adding the layout would be to just wrap your app in layout. And this is a really common way of adding layouts, and this would work fantastically. And you can see here, it just says home in our list item. But sometimes our layouts need to be a little bit more dynamic. We want to add different layouts to different pages. So to do that, I'm going to create a getLayout function. Let's remove our layout from here. I'm going to say const getLayout equals component dot get layout. So this means that a page can either use a layout or it can not use a layout. It's an optional function. I'm going to pass in page here, and this needs to be wrapped in a function. Then I'm going to return our component in get layout. So if you're not using TypeScript, this will work. But if you're using TypeScript, we obviously need to add some props for this get layout. So let's say type next page with layout equals app props. So we're basically extending app props here. Then I'm going to say component is next with. So I'm going to add our get layout function, and it's going to be optional. And we're going to have a page property that has a type of React element. And this is just going to return a React node. So I need to capitalize P here. and I need to import React node from React. So let's use this type here. So I'm going to create a new type and I call this app props with layout equals app props. Again, we're just extending app props here. And next page with layout should actually extend next page, not app props, which obviously comes from next. You say and we're going to say component is going to be our next page with layout. And then we're just going to replace app props down here with our app props with layout. And you can see that TypeScript is now satisfied. So let's come over to our ID page and we can use this get layout function. So our page is called character page. So I'm going to call character page dot get layout. And this is going to be equal to a function. And the function is going to be get layout. It's going to take our page. Then we're going to return our layout component. And our layout component is going to wrap page. So this page here is going to be this page up here, character page. So we're just going to type of character page. Let's go into one of our components and you can see here we have our layout. So the last thing I'm going to show you is how to style your application. There's lots of different ways you can style your application. You can use a component library or you could use a CSS library like Tailwinds, but I'm just going to show you how to use the Next.js native CSS modules. So if you come over to your index page, you'll notice here that you're importing styles from home.module.css. And then you add a class name as styles.container. If we have a look at home.module, you can see that we have a class here of container. So let's add a couple of styles for our character page. So I'm going to create a new file called character.module.css. And inside our character page, I'm going to import styles from styles/character.module.css. Then I'm going to create a new class called container. And I'm just going to make the background color red. So now we can use our container class inside of our character page. So I'm going to say class name equals styles.container. And if we refresh our page, you can see that we get a big red background on our container. So that is how to build React applications with Next.js. If you like the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.